Guys, I'm currently in Lichfield outside Cruck House. I've actually been here earlier to film it, but I've gone off, got myself a bloody haircut, and then come back because I forgot to do the intro. So, here it is, Cruck House, let's get into it.
Cruck House on Stowe Street is one of the oldest domestic buildings still standing in Lichfield. And even though it now sits amongst a much more modern street scene, its frame takes us back to the late 1400s or early 1500s, when small houses were still being built by heavy timber, with the shape of the wood playing a part in how the building itself was put together. When it was first built, it was most likely a modest home rather than anything grand or official, and that's part of what makes it important now, because ordinary buildings are often the ones that disappear first when towns around them are redeveloped. The name Cruck House comes from the way the building was made, because a cruck frame uses large curved timbers which rise through the structure and help carry the roof. So instead of the roof simply sitting on modern walls, the weight's taken through these shaped pieces of wood which act almost like the bones of the building. We don't know exactly where the timber came from, but buildings of this type are usually made from oak, probably sourced locally or regionally, and the curved pieces would have been chosen because of the natural shape, a shape that could be worked into the frame. Historic England describes Cruck House as a rare survival in the Lichfield area, which matters because the city would once have had more timber frame buildings than we see today. And over the centuries, many of those older structures were changed so much that their medieval origins either disappeared completely or became hidden beneath later work. Cruck House seems to have gone through that same process, and before restoration it had become two cottages, known as numbers 71 and 73 Cruck Cottages, with later changes hiding much of the older frame from view. That's why this rediscovery story matters, because during the redevelopment of Stowe Street in the 20th century, when other buildings in the area were being cleared and the later layers around Cruck House were stripped away, the older timber frame was revealed. What might have been demolished as part of an ageing row of cottages was suddenly recognised as a late medieval cruck frame building that had been standing in Lichfield for hundreds of years. There are slightly different dates attached to the restoration, with Historic England referring to restoration in 1971, and Staffordshire Past Track recording council restoration work in the later 70s. So the safest version to say is that Cruck House was rescued during that redevelopment, was restored by the council and brought back into use rather than being lost with the rest of the street. What we see today is a restored survival rather than a completely untouched medieval building, because parts of the structure were renewed during the restoration. But the important point is that the cruck frame and the story of the building were recognised before it disappeared. My mum used to clean this building and she told me so many stories about it being haunted. Only the normal kind of stories though, nothing specific. Things like the Hoover turning itself on or lights switching themselves off. I'd definitely treat that as folklore rather than proven history, because any building that stood in the same place for around 500 years passed through different layouts and uses, and then reappeared from beneath later alterations during redevelopment is exactly the sort of place where these stories tend to gather. Today, Cruck House belongs to Lichfield Council and it's used as a community building, leased to Kerborough Community Association and available for small meetings, groups and local activities. That feels like a fitting continuation of its story, because Cruck House did not begin as a monument or a showpiece. It began as a practical building for people, and even after centuries of change, restoration and rediscovery, it still has a working role in the city. And that's what makes it worth noticing, because it was not one of Lichfield's grand buildings, but an ordinary house that survived long enough to be recognised as one of the city's rare surviving links to late medieval domestic life.